All right, buckle up, because we're diving head first into some seriously spooky history today, haunted battlefields. You know I love a good ghost story. And the stuff you've sent over about these places, well, let's just say I'm hooked.
And you're not alone. There's something about battlefields, that combination of history and the paranormal, that really gets under your skin. It's not your average haunted house, that's for sure.
Absolutely not. Yeah. So before we get into specific spots, Gettysburg, the Alamo, all those iconic places, I'm curious what makes battlefields such hot spots for paranormal activity. Is there like a common thread that runs through all these stories?
Well, one thing that jumps out is the sheer scale of the conflicts. I mean, we're talking massive losses of life, often very suddenly and violently. Imagine that emotional energy, the trauma, almost frozen in time.
It's heavy stuff, no doubt. To think about thousands, tens of thousands of lives lost in a single place.
Exactly. And some believe that energy, that anguish, can actually imprint itself on the location. It's like an echo that continues to resonate even centuries later.
So it's not just about the battles themselves, but the emotional weight that lingers long after the fighting is over.
Exactly. And that brings us to the types of hauntings reported at these sites. What are people actually experiencing?
Apparitions of soldiers are pretty common, often seen in full uniform, still marching, standing guard, almost like they're trapped, reliving those final moments.
Absolutely. It's as if they can't escape that moment, that fight. And then there are the sounds, gunfire, cannon blasts, even the screams of soldiers long after the battle's ended.
You know, reading about those sounds, it's one thing to see a ghostly figure, but to hear those echoes of battle, it's like being transported back in time to experience the terror firsthand.
And it's not just sounds. Many reports mention sudden temperature drops, a physical sensation that something's not quite right, like you're stepping into a space where the veil between our world and the next is thin.
It's interesting you mention that because it feels like battlefields, with their history of death and loss, might create a unique vulnerability to that kind of spiritual crossover.
It's a powerful way to put it. And what's fascinating is that these common threads appear across battlefields all over the world. It's not just an American thing.
So it's more than just one specific conflict. It's a larger human experience of conflict, of loss,
Yeah.
and maybe even what comes after.
Exactly. And that's what makes this exploration so compelling. We're not just talking about ghosts, but about echoes of history, mysteries that continue to fascinate us centuries later.
Okay, so we've talked about those common threads, but now I'm ready to dive into some actual locations.
Right.
And you've included some seriously spooky ones.
Well, we can't talk haunted battlefields without mentioning Gettysburg, right?
Yeah.
It's practically the poster child for paranormal activity.
And for good reason, right? I mean,
Yeah.
50,000 casualties.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to grasp.
It really is. And those documentaries you shared, Haunted America, The Ghosts of Gettysburg, Haunted History, Ghosts of Gettysburg, they really capture the weight of that history. They talk about this heavy, oppressive atmosphere, especially around spots like Little Round Top, Devil's Den, places where the fighting was most intense.
And then there are the individual stories, like that house, the Tilly Pierce House Inn. Imagine going there for a weekend getaway and seeing a
Right.
ghost cat.
Or even creepier, those stories about spectral children haunting the halls. And it's not just random hauntings, it's like the stories connect back to the battle itself. Like that soldier who's said to still roam the halls, mourning the loss of his arm. It's those details that really stick with you.
Absolutely. And Gettysburg might be the most famous, but the Civil War, it left its mark on so many places. Like Antietam, with that chilling bloody lane.
Bloody Lane. The documentaries The Ghosts of Antietam and Haunted Battlefields Antietam really go into the horrors that took place there. Hundreds killed in a matter of hours. And now people claim to see them, still fighting, still trapped in that moment.
And it's not just the apparitions, is it? Didn't you mention phantom drum
Oh,
beats?
yeah. Near those old field hospitals, the Pry House and the Piper House, people have reported hearing them. Like the anguish of that day is woven into the very fabric of those places.
And speaking of anguish, the siege of Vicksburg. 47 days under siege. Vicksburg. Ghosts of the past really highlighted the desperation of that time. It's no wonder it's so
visitors,
active.
researchers, they've reported seeing figures, hearing voices, even sudden chills like walking through a cold spot.
Almost like the land itself remembers the
It's an
trauma.
interesting thought. And it's not just the Civil War, or even America for that matter. These stories, these themes, they pop up everywhere.
Right, so it's less about one specific war and more about how we as humans process death,
Yeah.
loss. maybe even the
Exactly.
afterlife.
Like, take the Alamo. It's more than just a building in Texas. It's a symbol of sacrifice, of courage. Phantom Echoes, The Haunting of the Alamo, talks about how those stories, those who died defending it, they still resonate with us today.
I bet the weight of history hangs heavy there. What kind of hauntings are we
Well,
talking
you
about?
have your classic apparitions, soldiers in period clothing, still standing guard. But it's the sounds there that are really eerie. Footsteps, whispers, even the clash of swords. And it's always in the dead of night, like a ghostly reenactment that only some can witness.
Chills, literally. Just thinking about it.
Yeah.
And speaking of iconic battles, we can't forget about Little
Right,
Bighorn.
Custer's last stand. And no matter how you interpret that event, the sheer scale of the tragedy, it's hard to deny something lingers there. Little Bighorn, Ghosts of General Custer really gets into that.
And with tragedy often come the ghost stories.
Exactly. People have reported figures on horseback, voices on the wind, even the sounds of battle echoing across the plains. It's as if those final moments are playing on a loop visible only to certain people.
It's wild, isn't it? From Gettysburg to Little Bighorn, the stories share so many similarities. It makes you wonder if those intense emotions somehow seep into the land
It's a
itself.
compelling thought. And it's not just an American thing either. The material mentions Towton in England, one of the bloodiest battles of the War of the Roses, and Culloden in Scotland, the final Jacobite rising.
Both places steeped in history, and of course rumored to be haunted. It really highlights the global nature of this,
It
doesn't it?
does. It speaks to a universal need to understand what might lie beyond.
So we've traveled from Gettysburg to Little Bighorn to Scotland. And it's clear that wherever there's been a battle, there are ghost stories.
Yeah.
But how do investigators even approach these locations? Is it just like EMF meters and hope
It's
for
a
the
bit
best?
more involved than that. I mean, these aren't just random haunted houses. You've got centuries of history to consider.
Right, like you don't want to mistake a car backfiring for a ghostly gunshot.
Exactly. One of the researchers you mentioned described it as building a case, not just collecting spooky sounds. You need that historical context.
So like knowing the layout of the battlefield, what units fought where, all of that matters.
Absolutely. Even personal stories of the soldiers who died there. It adds layers to the investigation. It helps separate the explainable from the potentially paranormal.
Okay, so once they've done their homework, what kind of tools are we talking about? Anything that would make those Ghostbusters
I
jealous?
wish. No proton packs just yet, but their toolkit is still pretty impressive. You've got your EMF readers, digital voice recorders, hoping to capture those EVPs we talked about earlier.
Man, EVPs always give me the creeps. It's like those voices from beyond whispering
Right.
secrets.
And some researchers analyze those recordings for changes in frequency, looking for patterns, even messages.
Whoa, trying to decode messages from the other side. That's next
It's
level
pretty
stuff.
wild. And then on the visual side, alongside regular cameras, they're using infrared and thermal cameras.
To catch those ghostly figures on film.
Exactly. Or even just those cold spots, the sudden temperature drops that people report. It's like finding a ghostly fingerprint.
That's a cool way to think about it. So it's a mix of technology and good old-fashioned detective work.
Exactly. And speaking of detectives, this field has some sharp minds working in it. Your sources mentioned the team from Ghost Hunters and TAPS.
Oh yeah, I've seen them. They're like the celebrities of the
Uh-huh.
paranormal world.
Well, they've definitely brought more attention to this kind of research. And it's not just them. There are researchers all over the world. People like Masafumi Kobayashi in Japan, Lee Kirkland, who's done a ton of work at Perryville.
Wow, so it's a global effort to uncover
It
these
really
mysteries.
is, which I think speaks to the heart of why we're so drawn to these stories. There's something about haunted battlefields that goes beyond just a good scare.
It makes you think, doesn't it? About history, about loss, maybe even what happens after we
Big
die.
questions, and I don't think there are any easy answers.
Maybe that's part of the appeal. It's the unknown, that sense of mystery that keeps us coming back for more.
Exactly. Keeps us asking questions, searching for answers.
And that's what makes these deep dives so much fun. Thanks for indulging my spooky side and taking me on this journey through haunted battlefields. For everyone listening, if you've got a local battlefield, maybe do a little digging, see what you can unearth. You never know what might be lurking beneath the surface. Until next time, stay curious.